So with that, I will turn this over to President Cross, who will introduce the panelists and give you a brief overview of our conversation today.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks, Jeff. I only see Regent Ed Manideeds and Regent Karen Walsh. I believe that Regent Bob Atwell is on as well. Is Regent Klein, Jeff, is he on?
We're working on Regent Klein. She had some technical issues, and John from Shared Services is reaching out to her. I should say, Regent Atwell, I can see you, and if you'd like to speak, I can unmute you, but since you're calling in, I can't make you a panelist. But Regent Atwell is on the call, and if you'd like to speak, just let us know either in the chat window or through raising your hand.
So I would like each of those board members just to introduce themselves, if they would, please.
I guess I'll go first. Thank you, Ray. This is Regent Karen Walsh from Madison, Wisconsin. Thank you very much, all of you who are on the call today. We appreciate the opportunity to get your feedback and work together with you on this.
This is Regent Ed Manideeds from Eau Claire, and I'm also glad to participate and happy to hear your comments. Thank you.
Yes. Jeff, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure if I'm visible, but I am listening. This is Regent Tracy Klein, and very pleased to be here today. Appreciate everybody who's attending. Anxious to hear your thoughts on behalf of the Board of Regents. Thank you so much.
And Regent Atwell, I just unmuted you if you'd like to speak.
Hey everybody, Bob Atwell from Green Bay, actually currently Washington Island. Looking forward to it being Green Bay again, but great to be here. Looking forward to everyone's ideas, and I'll be listening in.
Okay, thank you. Just a little brief overview. First of all, what I put in front of the board some time ago now were three concepts. They were not fleshed out a great deal at all, just concepts involving the prioritization and evaluation of programs and services across the system. Secondly, consolidating and standardizing services, administrative and operational functional areas. And thirdly, creating a more strategic online offering across the system. Those have been interpreted in many different ways, as probably one might suspect, because there was not a lot of flesh on those ideas. They were concepts to be taken much further. So I want to point out that the challenges we face as a system, we've already been cut in our current budget, that is the one that ends on June 30th, by roughly 5% GPR. We're negotiating all of that, but that's a reduction already, and in the form of a lapse, which means they didn't cut our base, they just took cash from us. We are anticipating some pretty significant cuts over the next year, maybe 2 years, as the economy suffers not only in this state. To give you an example that concerns me a great deal, New Jersey has cut its budget to their state universities by 25%. I don't know the percentage in Michigan, that hasn't been stated yet, but the state is cutting its state budget by $3.6 billion between now and September 1. Missouri, Colorado, a number of states around us have announced significant cuts to their higher education systems or institutions. I don't think we will be held harmless in this process. I wish that were so, but that we have short-term and long-term issues, and how we deal with those is critically important. But I wanted to put that in as a backdrop for what we're facing. The recommendations that I put on the table are things that I think need to be done irregardless, given the demographics we face, the projections for state funding before COVID-19, and the kinds of challenges that confront us with diminishing high school graduates and an increasing number of people in the workplace or in our communities that have some college but do not have a degree and cannot return to our campuses. So these three recommendations were concepts that I put in front of the board for them to ponder, concepts coming from an exiting president. And they need much debate and much discussion, and they need to be criticized and challenged. But the challenges that face us as an organization remain. And I think that we all realize that. So we're here for feedback. We're here for honest, straightforward conversation. Unfortunately, our timeline is short, and I know I put in this recommendation that we wanted this done by January the 21st or something like that. I can't remember. Obviously, that's a really short time frame, and those are the kinds of things that, can we even do that? That's a fair question. But I also want to compare that to the challenge, the financial challenges we face. We may not have a choice, and that's partly what's difficult about this, is talking about these kinds of things in that context. I know that Jeff has asked everybody to raise their hands, so please, if you have questions or comments, or you want to even read statements to the board members that are listening, please don't hesitate to do that. We want to be candid with each other, but we also really want to hear your thoughts. This is our organization, not any individuals. With that, Jeff, please, and anyone, the floor is open for questions, comments.
All right, thank you, Ray. Currently, no questions are up in the queue. Oh, unless I'm missing one. Maybe one thing we could start with, Ray, while people are populating the queue and maybe getting lined up, is talk a little bit about the process and the timeline moving forward, and what kind of steps would have to happen as you develop the guidelines, and that you'd envision this process working.
I can try this. We will need, obviously, engagement of shared governance and campuses heavily. The first, one of the critical phases is an assessment of existing programs on a campus to be accomplished by the faculty and staff and administration on that campus. The model that is one that's common. There's 3 or 4 out there. Massey has a model. Dickinson has a model. I think Campbell and Booker have a model. So there's a model for looking at the programs that you offer to help evaluate quality, demand, and an alignment with the institution's mission. Many campuses have already done some of that. They've had to do that, and that's good. And hopefully we can use, or you can use, that work that you've already done to help in this effort. But that would be one phase of this. And the sad part of that is it all comes in the middle of this ridiculous, it's not ridiculous, this troubling and challenging coronavirus we're facing. So that makes everything even more difficult.
Ray, can I interrupt you for just real briefly? We do have a couple people that raised their hands. Just as I said, no one had their hands raised. So why don't we pitch it over to them? First, we have Terry Warfield. Terry, you should be unmuted now.
Thank you. Thank you, President Kloss and Regents, for hosting these listening sessions. And I think we really appreciate the opportunity to be able to kind of have a back and forth around this. I just want to raise 2 points. One, I'm not gonna read the statement that the UW-Madison University Committee submitted. I trust that Ray, you and your staff, and maybe you shared with the regents, or it should have. It was addressed to the regents too. So
yes,
we did respond, and it was in part we were responding in terms of what we saw in the blueprint as written, so So we understand these exigencies. We are in a difficult time, and as you know, Ray, there are a lot of campuses across the system are already responding to some of these challenges, and in some cases along the lines that are being addressed in the blueprint. Many campuses, Madison included, is engaging a pretty significant effort around online and expanding our online presence. And so I think some of the things that are in the blueprint, they kind of touch on some things that are received maybe in the context of, gosh, we're already doing a lot of work here, and we are thinking about and trying to progress along these lines. So, but our statement was really more about just reminding or encouraging UW system and the regents to continue to engage with the shared governance groups. The decisions around the blueprint right now are important decisions. They have far-reaching, they'll have far-reaching effects beyond the response to COVID-19. So I wanted to make that one point. And then the second thing, and this is when I was able to personally spend a little bit more time with the blueprint and reflect a little bit on the work that we've been doing in the online space and your first concept around revising missions. I just want to make sure that we are clear that mission statements could have an element of online in them already. So there's an interaction between a mission statement and what a campus might be doing and some of the elements of the online concept. And of course, as everyone on the call knows, these are very different things depending on the campus. The way Madison is able to attack, Madison or Milwaukee, let's say, has been able to attack some of the online initiatives is probably very different than any other campuses. And I've attended a lot of regent meetings over the last couple of years, being on the UC, and have seen online programs approved by the regents, and so now that's a little bit of a head scratcher, because clearly units have, or campuses already have, missions that probably reflect some of those elements. So it'll be good to see how that kind of evolves, and evolves in a way that there's a full discussion among the various stakeholders around how those missions are going to change, and how online may be a very important part of that, or not. What does that mean if you're not in the online space in a big way? What does that mean? So those are my two things. One is thank you for reading our statement about shared governance participation in this process. And then number two, just kind of wondering or want to understand better how those concepts interrelate.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you for sending the statement too and sharing your thoughts. Just a short comment on the online piece of this. But the principle behind my comment is this: we have a very decentralized distribution model for our online courses. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not arguing that there's anything wrong with that, except we only have between 5 and 8% of the upper Midwest market. And I think we need a more strategic approach, more collaborative, in an effort to grow that significantly over the next decade. And that's going to require a marketing plan that will allow us at some level to compete with Southern New Hampshire, Purdue Global, Arizona State, Western Governors, all coming into this state and aggressively marketing their products. And that offends me. And I think we need a collaborative, coordinated approach to how best market our individual programs, and in a way that's strategic. And I think that's the essence of that whole third point, Terry.
Jeff, could I weigh in, or Ray, could I weigh in on this? Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
you know, we sat through other listening sessions where people, professors, I think, raised the importance of having each campus, each comprehensive have brand identity around their online programming. Right now, I chair the education committee. Regent Menedides and Regent Walsh are also members of that committee. And what we're grappling with, just to give you some insight, is in the world of limited resources. You know, how do we be efficient? You know, first of all, how do we brand our online programming? How do we be efficient about developing it, accelerate the quality? And, you know, we like the idea of collaborative work only because it would seem like it might bring in the best of all, you know, of all thinking. Now we understand Madison is in a little different spot, but I do think we're going to be looking for good ideas to accelerate our online presence, as President Cross said, in such a way that we can be the market leader. And I'm not sure in my own mind whether we can be the market leader with 13 different programs. So just wanted to say that.
Next up, it is Mary Bauman, and Mary, you should be unmuted.
Thank you. My name is Mary Bowman. I am the chair of the Common Council at UW Stevens Point, which represents all three employment classifications. I feel obligated to share that there are some people on my campus who are very opposed to any kind of program prioritization that that would be system-wide. However, there are many who are open to having conversations about these kinds of system-level plans. I have a number of specific concerns about some of what's been proposed, but probably as many of my colleagues have those as well and can voice those. If not, I'll put them in the chat later. But I wanted to make just a couple of overarching points. One, if we're going to have an effective plan, that needs to be informed by the boots on the ground. That doesn't mean the provosts and CBOs and CIOs, although those people need to be in the conversation as well. But I mean the instructional staff, the advisors, the recruiters, the people who process the payroll. Those people have knowledge of how these things work and what the needs are and what problems there might be that people at system can't have, that even campus leadership can't have just because of where people are positioned. We need that information to inform the plan. Two, if the plan's going to succeed, it has to have buy-in from faculty, staff, and students. The way to achieve both of those goals is to back up, start with a ground-up process. I suggest that having each campus gather the data and ideas and questions that already exist. A lot of us are already working on many of the very issues that the blueprint addresses. Gather those ideas and the data, and then send delegations to some kind of system-wide task force or consortium or whatever we want to call it. Having these plans made at the system level without first consulting with the people who do the work is doomed to failure. Thank you.
So my response, Mary, and thank you for sharing that. That is not the intent. What for the system to say, here's the plan, and that's the way it is. It is the intent for us to solicit and engage campuses and faculty and staff and members of the staff broadly, as you suggested, including alumni and members of the community. Those are typical standard engagement processes when one is evaluating and prioritizing programs, regardless of the model you use. What was put on the table is a concept that would, I hope, initiate that bottom-up process, and that's how it's intended. However, there also is a piece that I think we have to figure out with your help. As you suggested, maybe there's a large meeting after those campuses, after each campus has done their role. There's a large meeting with representatives from a lot of different groups, conversing about what is the state need? How do we now look at this as a state, not just an individual institution? And that's going to take some engagement in a broad way, but a necessary piece, I think, and that's what my recommendation is about. In the end, this is a process that requires a statewide perspective, not just an institutional perspective. And that has to involve a number of people from a number of campuses at different levels.
All right, next up we have, and I don't have the whole, Sherry Arndt. And Sherry, you should be unmuted.
Thank you for listening to us today. I represent UW Green Bay, and I have a statement after gathering some concerns from my areas on campus, such as HR, IT, and the Center for Advancement in Teaching and Learning. So I'd like to state my comment, and then I'll take your feedback. If you have questions, I can answer. UWGB has an approved mission and vision to provide to the northeastern Wisconsin region and have set plans in place to do so. The concerns that my campus has shared with me is that shared services will be able to provide the human resources components and services that are promised, as in this last year and a half has not been the case. Also, that campuses should be involved, or to be involved with shared governance and with the people in the IT area specifically for plans for consolidation due to the great planning that IT functions involve to do so from an IT standpoint. Then also that plans sent to campus centers, such as at UW Green Bay, the Center for Advancement in Teaching and Learning, be charged from points coming from academics to include the governance bodies that are really subject matter experts, such as OPID, the Office for Professional Development and Instructional Executive Committee, LTDC, the Learning Technology Development Council, and the DLEAC, which is the Digital Learning Environment Advisory Council, which many of our CATL people are involved with. And lastly, I have to touch on a very important human factor of how the Blueprint 3 prongs will affect all the persons that are currently doing the work on those campuses and are engaged heavily and wholeheartedly in these processes. Campus is willing to work with system on these things, but please hear that these are major concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. I can't speak for the board, but I think we share those concerns and we want to work with you. That's our commitment.
Next up would be Jason Diacchioli, and Jason, you should be unmuted.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. I really do appreciate everybody here giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Jason Diacchioli. I am the Vice Chair of Common Council at UW Stevens Point. I hope and I look forward to this being one of many conversations and look forward to actually seeing people face to face rather than across a screen. So I think one of the elephants in the room for Stevens Point has been what we have gone through the past few years with respect to Point Forward. And are getting our house in order. And we finally have come to a place where we are comfortable bringing something forward to the Board of Regents. You'll be seeing that in your June meeting. And I just want people to be cognizant of when the initial document dropped, it took a long time for the kind of change that we proposed to actually come to fruition. And that was one university in the system. So I think everybody is aware of this, but when you're looking at 13 comprehensive branch campuses, and even Madison and Milwaukee, who are going to be doing whatever they're going to do separately, that is a tremendous lift to do in a short period of time, especially when you need that sort of ground up consensus building. So, you know, I really do hope this is just the first in a series of conversations that we can have, keeping in mind that we need to expedite, but also we need to be deliberate in our approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I totally understand and I think we all do, we've been hit with an existential crisis, and we don't have the luxury of a lot of time, and that's partly what's frustrating. But I understand that, and I just think of the tremendous progress that Stevens Point has made to resolve so many of their problems, and then we get hit with another crisis, and that's so frustrating. So I do want to commend all of you, particularly your admissions folks, Mary and Jason, both of you from the Common Council have done a terrific job. I do want to add one point to that, though, that I don't know how large a cut we might be facing once the revenue projections are in for next year. All I know is that several of our neighboring states are facing massive cuts. Massive cuts. When I say massive, cuts over 15 to 25%. That's on top of the challenges that many campuses already face, and that's just overwhelming to me right now.
All right, thank you, Ray. Next up would be Christy Wilkham, but before I unmute Christy, I'll ask that folks who have spoken, who are not asking to speak again, unraise your hand so that I can make sure I'm getting people their time. Thank you, Sherry. Next up is Christy.
Hello, President Cross and the Regents. My name is Christy Wilkham, and I am a faculty member on the Fond du Lac campus, which is now associated with UW Oshkosh. I have a comment and a question for you. President Cross, being at the colleges, I've heard you use a very similar line of argument for bringing change to the college's organization, particularly in the condensing of the 2-year and 4-year campuses. And once that effort was underway, I then heard you talk a lot about not expecting a cost savings from the condensing of those campuses. So I have some significant concerns about the blueprint, particularly because it didn't have the, as you said earlier today, meat on the bones, that it was conceptual. So my question is really about, can we expect the kind of cost savings that you're hoping to see through the centralization that you're proposing? The other comment that I have, and again, I'll step off after this, is really about centralized services. Having been at the colleges, we lived through the centralized services of the colleges, and I can see benefit in doing that. But I also have significant concern about centralized services in the sense that the 2-year campuses during the regionalization process, before we were merged into the 4-year institutions, were left with gaps, I would say, in my own opinion, to service the mission of our institution. Particularly when we looked at IT and advising, the cuts that were, or the way in which some of the decisions were made, left us without the ability to serve our students as well as we would have liked. So I asked the board and I ask you to consider those things as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. So first of all, the reason that I didn't actually use the word cost savings. I just thought we want to reallocate resources that were monies that were used for administrative or non-teaching functions into the teaching function side. So I didn't expect to see any monies that would be taken away from those campuses or cost savings in that sense. So that's just a clarification. I would totally agree with you on a couple of points. One of the things that troubled me greatly is that I felt like the support systems for students, I'm not sure about the IT capability, but the support systems for students at campuses where that was needed perhaps more than at the 4-year campuses was really deficient at the 2-year colleges. Student support services, which is badly needed there, were gaps. Those gaps were created, and over time we were hoping to shift money to those support services by saving on administrative operational costs. So that was part of the goal.
Regent Atwell, I asked to speak, so you are unmuted, sir.
Thank you. I just want to comment that I deeply appreciate the input we're receiving. I want to offer an authentic, I guess, perspective from my point of view. These are personal comments, not the opinions of the Regents as a body in any way. I was one of the people who encouraged President Cross to offer his thoughts as his tenure was coming to an end. I was kind of doing so before we had the COVID events arise. And I commend him for being willing to speak clearly. I think that the process as it rolled out at the last Regents meeting was tremendously confusing to a lot of people, including Regents, I might add. So yes, we're listening. Yes, we know we have a task ahead of us. Yes, it can't be done well without robust campus level support and understanding. And I think my opinion is the first task is to really try to bring more clarity to the overall goals we're trying to achieve. That is to lay out the linear program we're trying to solve for, which is some combination of lower costs, better outcomes, more digital presence. So I think it'll be a tremendously difficult decision-making process. It does have to be done quickly and with, I don't know what quickly means, but timely. Otherwise, what happens is when the state figures out what the budget, what the revenue is at a state level in the coming year or so, or not even a year, we could well be seeing 15 to 20 plus state revenue, and that's speculation and somewhat informed speculation on my part down that the state's looking at. So I really look forward to a process. We're going to have new leadership. I know that again, I'm appreciative that Ray offered his perspective, and I want to assure you that the Regents I've talked to understand that we need to have this, not only this kind of input, but strong local engagement. But let's not kid ourselves. It's going to be a tough task, but it's happening all over the state in various organizations. We can do better, and we're going to have to do better with less. And that's the reality of the situation that I think we're facing as a state. Again, my opinions, and thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next up will be Jeremy Johansky, and you should be unmuted.
Great. Thank you, panel and President Cross, the chair of the university staff representatives at the system. And I just wanted to echo some of the concerns that I had heard from some of the campuses in what the rapid mandating of transitioning to shared services activities might actually look like, since it's never really been in the language that the system likes to use of prescribing. It seems like a position change, and then further the acknowledgement of not engaging all stakeholders going forward. What are we expecting to see that look like?
I had difficulty hearing all of that. Maybe it was just me. Your microphone or something is a little weird, Jeremy. Could you try that again, please? Tracy, you're
certainly. Can you hear me better this time?
No.
I'm basically asking in regards to the consolidation and transition to shared services on a more rapid timeline. Some of the campuses have expressed concern for not having stakeholders normally that would be involved in that process be engaged. And what is this more rapid transition in mandating from system going to look like? Since it's never really been the position of the system to prescribe, seeing language like mandating is significantly challenging to swallow all of a sudden at this time. And a lot of the campuses are concerned about what that means in the contraction of those IT procurement without being engaged in that process. What are we expecting that to look like?
I'll start, but I'd like for Rob to think about something, to think about his answer to this too. One of the things that we have been working on very, I would say methodically, carefully, using a lot of stakeholder engagement is the shared services piece of this, been growing those function by function, pieces by pieces. Now we have to be much more aggressive. We just don't have the time. That's what I'm trying to articulate in the recommendation. We want to engage everybody we can, but the timeline is pressing against us. And this is one area where we feel like we've already got a head start. So I'll let Rob perhaps put some flesh on that comment.
Yeah, so first, I would welcome any advice people have in terms of broader engagement. You know, we launched the Shared Services Initiative. We stood up the Customer Council, which includes some CBOs and provosts to try and have that institutional perspective and give us input and guidance. As we go forward, you know, what do we need to do? Maybe expanding that group. We're doing some other outreach to include. I think it's really important to have that, but at the same time, the core premise of all this is standardizing and streamlining and consolidating, maybe not consolidating physically, but virtually. And part of our challenge is the legacy environment we've built. You know, the example that I hear a lot about is how we did HRS. We didn't standardize business practices. And I think that was a big mistake. We missed an opportunity. We've been paying the price ever since. And now is the time to really define what are the current best practices at a couple of institutions, and let's leverage those out rather than spending too much time rethinking something that one of our campuses is already doing pretty well. Let's get the good exemplars and roll those out and share those with people so that we can move faster, as the president has noted.
All right, next up, and by the way, we're at 15 minutes to 2. So we have about 15 minutes. We can obviously go a little longer since we got off to a little later start, but just giving people an update on where we stand. Next up is Jeff Peterson. You should be unmuted.
Hopefully you can hear me.
Yep, we can.
Cool. So I have 2 questions. One is somewhat more technical perhaps, and one is generally towards the board. My first question, and this is mostly directed at Ray, don't the revisions to SIS 102, specifically the small program review policy, actually address the vast majority of the things you're raising in the program array? We only just got done revising that, and we have no idea how it works. So it seems like we're replacing a policy before we've actually implemented a policy. And then my broader question is, given the environment we're in right now and how we are preparing theoretically for the fall, this feels like an incredibly heavy lift to dump on every single campus when we're still trying to figure out how we can, for example, social distance lectures and things of that nature. Would it not be more prudent to delay these discussions for a little while and see what happens in the fall first?
I'll take the first part of that. If we were only looking at the size of a program, that is at its enrollment and the number of graduates it produces, then that policy would be helpful to an institution. But those are only a couple of the components of any evaluation process. There are going to be a number of low enrolled programs around the state that are absolutely necessary and core to one's mission. And we can't forget that. So it isn't just size of enrollment or the number of graduates that a program produces. It's also what is the need in the state, and how do we look at that across the system, not just at a given institution. And of course, one of the things we have to look at is, these programs are duplicated. Is that okay? Is this necessary? That a comprehensive institution is going to need at least a broad base in some way. How broad? And can we find ways to share programs across institutions and continue to provide access geographically all over the place? So I think that particular policy that we spent quite a bit of time on, as you say, Jeff, it is relevant to a given campus and part of that program review. But broader than that, how does the state look at it? The second part, you're absolutely right. It would definitely be more prudent to delay this. I'd love to do that. It would be great to do that. We're all being faced with a crisis that we would rather not deal with. But I think the two actually go together. I don't know how we're going to live with the kind of financial challenges we face if we don't just really aggressively, honestly look at ourselves and review that process. And that's going to require a lot of time and work, even while we are making adjustments that are just going to be, well, never in my career have I faced anything like this, and I suspect neither of you, Jeff, but you're a political science person, so maybe you have, I don't know.
All right, thank you, Ray. Next up is Mark Sackman had some responses on the changes to colleges, excuse me, and so I'm pulling him out of the Q&A, and hopefully, Mark, you're up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So thank you all for taking the time. Just a few things in terms of consolidation of IT. I teach in Fox City. UWO was UW Fox Valley before the merger. And while we may save money when we start to centralize services, it became very frustrating not having people on campus to help us, and things that would take maybe an hour to fix, or somebody could come in to my classroom and adjust. I would wait days or weeks before things could get fixed. And we are, of course, more and more dependent on technology, even before we locked down and put everything on technology. So something to think about. Online, I have to say, I have not taught online, but I have a lot of colleagues who did. And it is frustrating listening to the conversation in some ways, because UW colleges had developed a really fine and excellent and productive and revenue, it earned $2 million a year, generated $2 million a year in revenue. And that has been pretty much just disbanded, broken up, and discarded. And I would urge going forward that we go back to those faculty who developed all those courses and developed that program and use that expertise again, which is not being used. A lot of the colleagues who developed courses have been closed out from ever teaching online again at the current and what we're looking at now. So I would urge us in terms of online, which is obviously so important, that we use that expertise. And then finally, there is a real budget crisis. I understand what President Cross was talking about in terms of the timeline. I mean, this is a terrible time to try to look at and revise the entire UW system at the same time as we're simply trying to figure out how we're going to have classes in the fall. So, but there is the budget crisis. I would urge all of you, the Board of Trustees, President Cross, everybody, to really get the legislature involved and support our federal congressmen, senators, to make sure that the Congress passes some bills that are already in the pipeline in Congress in Washington to support the states so that we don't have these massive cuts. And somehow, I mean, our state legislators seem to think that, well, we don't need the help. We do need the help. And I think it would really be very helpful if the Board of Regents and the administration would make clear to the state legislature, to the public, that we need aid, not because we've been profligate and haven't balanced our books, but because we've been hit with this massive virus and that it's devastated the economy. And so I would urge so that we do not, I mean, we cannot afford a 20% cut. Thank you for listening.
Mark, thank you. Good to hear from you again. Let me try to just respond to several of your points. First of all, with respect to IT, distinguishing what needs to be on the campus and what can be done at some other location is part of the challenge for IT, and Rob and his team are trying to sort that out. And I'm not sure that was done as well as it should have been, as you pointed out previously, when they consolidated that within the colleges. Secondly, the colleges did offer and can continue to offer a 2-year degree online in both the traditional format. I always say you can get a full 2 years from the colleges in the traditional format, face-to-face, in an online format, and in the flex format. So the colleges were clearly out in front of that. And I have nothing but compliments for the faculty who put that together. And it does continue, Mark, and it needs to be elevated in terms of its stature. I don't think a lot of people understand that you can get the first 2 years entirely in those formats.
Can't anymore.
The third point you made about the budget crisis, I have spent a lot of time with our federal delegation, phone calls on Saturdays and Sundays and weeknights with several of our folks. And believe me, we're pressing that issue, not just at the federal level, but Jeff will tell you how we're pressing it at the state and with the governor's office. The sad part is, we don't have any money either. Now, if the federal government passes the HEROES Act, I don't think it'll survive in the Senate, but that's an opportunity. I totally understand and agree with you that we have to be advocating aggressively for our appropriate share here. But there's one other thing that we're advocating for that I will try to explain as succinctly as I can. Most of our competitive institutions, whether it's Michigan, Michigan State, Indiana, Ohio, most of our competitive institutions right now have the ability to borrow to help them bridge over this cash flow crisis. Indiana just borrowed $1 billion. The University of Indiana, not the state of Indiana, just borrowed $1 billion to bridge over this crisis. I cannot do that. I would do that in a heartbeat, Mark, if I was authorized to do that. That is a real problem in this state, and it hurts us enormously. So I had to get my editorial comment in there, Mark.
Thank you, Ray. Just to give everyone a status, we have about 6 or 7 people with their hands up waiting to speak. We also have a number of comments that have been submitted. So just to let everyone know where we're at. Next up is John Shelton. John, you should be unmuted. Thank you for your patience.
All right, thanks. Thanks so much. I'll make this quick, and you can respond if you'd like, but I really just have two points. First of all, I mean, this is really, I think, for the regents. I hope this really is the first of many conversations, and I want to just say that I really do appreciate the Regents Liaison Committee that's been set up. I know I've had some conversations with a couple of regents individually about this, and I know I've said this. I know faculty and staff have a reputation for just saying no. You'll be shocked to know that we have that reputation. But you know, I think most of us really recognize the gravity of this situation, and we don't want we don't want to just say no, right? Like, we want to be part of the conversation. And I think initially this plan felt like a fait accompli, and I'm really glad to see that this is being more of a deliberation. I just want to make two quick points. One, I strongly reiterate or back Mary Bowman's proposal for a system task force. And I would just say that in the event that this happens, and I think it's a terrific idea, it can't be cherry picked. Faculty and staff need to elect their representatives to represent their voices on this. And I think we really can come up with some creative ideas here to maintain access for our students and you know, make some of the tough choices that we're going to make. The second point I want to make is I think there's an important contradiction with Ray's argument earlier about the inevitability of these things and the blueprint plan. So Ray talked about the demographics of, you know, declining number of students, which suggested that, you know, some of these things needed to happen to begin with. I think we've got to be really careful about those assumptions. The assumptions about the demographic reality may very well not be right moving forward. As we know, after 2008, because of the labor market, actually a lot more students went to college. And so we may actually have more non-traditional students. We may have more people, you know, really thinking about their education. You could imagine if the federal government, you know, expanded Pell Grants, that would push more people, you know, to move in that direction, as happened after 2008. So, you know, I think what's really important here is that individual campuses, well, first of all, I would challenge the regents to as we move forward with a new system president, to constantly be thinking about the assumptions about these demographic challenges and reassessing them as we go. But I also think campuses really need to have as much autonomy as possible to determine how they're going to service their missions and reach out to students that are very different in their locales. So in Green Bay, our student population, potential student population, is becoming much more diverse. And so that means that the people, again, the boots on the ground, really need to be thinking about what programs are going to reach them, what they want, and not having that kind of dictated by the UW system, who may not have all of the information. So I'll just leave it at that. I know we're running low on time, and folks can respond if they want to, or we can just move on to the next comments. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next up will be Riley Garski. And Riley, you should be unmuted.
Hi, my name's Riley Garski. I am the student body vice president at UWSP. We've heard lots of comments about making sure faculty is involved in these decisions, but I think there's the flip side of this coin, and students also need to be very involved on these conversations. Part of the reason that UWSP moving forward after Point Forward has been so successful has been because the students were brought in on those conversations in a very big and meaningful way. And us students do realize that cuts are going to have to be made. Being a student who is more non-traditional and could only afford to attend my local university, I'm originally from Wisconsin Rapids, so I commute to Stevens Point. I think we need to have some good conversation about potentially limiting access for students like me who can't afford anything but their local universities. And so obviously the best way of going about that is ensuring that the student voices are heard and their experiences are heard. Because the UW system is wonderful. It has given me nothing but the best platform to get an education. And I worry that cuts could take that platform away from future students like me who have income limitations and where they can and cannot attend university. So that's just my comment that I had to make. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Riley. We want to make sure students and their voices heard in this, and the points you made. Access is incredibly important. If we're going to reduce access, we have to find ways to actually increase it if we can, and that's a commitment we're making. Thanks, Riley.
Next up will be Colin McNamara, but Riley, as a former student body vice president at UW Stevens Point, if I'd have known that was your title, I would have moved you way up the list. So I apologize for that. Next time, we'll get that in early. Colin McNamara, you are up and should be unmuted.
Hi, everyone. My name is Colin McNamara, and I'm the student body president at UW Stevens Point. And so I just kind of want to reiterate what Riley just said. And I ask that as this conversation moves forward, that students are as included as possible, because when given half an opportunity, the students have never let the system down. And please don't underestimate us, because we can offer insight that isn't always heard and sometimes isn't even always available. But I do look forward to working with all of you on behalf of the students at UWSP, on behalf of students across the state. So I just want to say thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you for sharing, Colin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt. Oh, Regent Klein.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the previous three speakers. First of all, to the student leaders. We do value at the Board of Regents your input so much. We've been blessed throughout the system with some just remarkable student leaders, two of which sit on the Board of Regents. But I have found you have great insight into the operating campuses and to the offering, and you are our product, and you are our customer. So we're very concerned about that. I would just say real quickly, I have 17 relatives that graduated from University of Wisconsin system and campuses, and it's heartfelt for me. My son said to me, "Mom, it's how people get educated in the state of Wisconsin." And that is our promise. That is paramount. So thanks for being in this session and for your views, and your views are important. And I know that's true for all on the Board of Regents. I also wanted to quickly speak to the system-wide task force. I thought the speaker, I'm not sure who it was who made the comment, but a really, really good idea. These listening sessions are very important. Recognize it's very hard for us as a Board of Regents sometimes to figure out how to govern, and I think that's true for system administration. Because of shared governance, which is a blessing, it's also hard to move. It's hard to move forward and productively and efficiently. And I think your idea of a system-wide task force is really a good one to advise the Board of Regents, and system on how this blueprint really could work. I think we all know we've got to be more efficient, but we want to also be better in that process. And getting that kind of an organized input would really be helpful. And I only speak as one region on that point, but I think it's a very good idea and deserves exploration.
Regent Walsh.
Actually, I was trying to get my cat off.
Oh.
We have a couple more folks that are interested in speaking. That is, next up would be Drusilla Scribner. And Drusilla, you should be off mute.
Okay, thank you. I am the Faculty Senate President at UW Oshkosh. And I just wanted to go back, I think it was Regent Manadides who maybe had raised the point about what are the problems that we're trying to solve. And I guess I want to ask that question with relationship to program array. And what is the nature of the problem we're trying to solve by looking at program array? I realize that we are facing very significant cuts coming up and cost issues. I don't see changes to the program array as really addressing cost. And instead, we have other problems that we've been looking at institutional and system level, such as declining enrollment and serving different student bodies, returning students, students who are coming back after having been in the workforce, veterans, and so forth. And in each of those instances, programs are a way of attracting those new student bodies and of keeping them, of retaining them. And so cuts to programs, particularly in a kind of top-down fashion, may very well work against trying to solve some of our other problems. So while we have this really kind of pressing cost issue impending, how does program array really address that problem?
I'll try to answer that if I can, Drusilla. First of all, we've gone from about 74,000 high school graduates a year to 64,000. And by 2026, that'll be about 64,000. It remains about there. And then after 2026, it drops yet again below 60,000. So the future of the number of graduates we have, high school graduates we have, is shrinking. Therefore, we must expand our market. We've captured about 33 to 34% of high school graduates historically. We have to capture more. That's part of our strategy. It's also important that we do more to serve the non-traditional students. So we're seeing a decline in demographics. We're also seeing a decline in state investment. So the program evaluation and prioritization isn't just about academic programs. It's also about the services and administrative functions that exist. We have to evaluate those. What must we absolutely provide in the future if we have less resources? What functions are a priority? I will conclude the comment with this, that in a typical university, depending on the extent of the research that institution does, it ranges from about 60% to 80, even 85%. The cost of operating that institution is in its people. So that's what higher education is all about, rightly so. So the idea of how do we reduce the functions that are less important, or I hate to say that, aren't as much of a priority, that's what this is about. And clearly that has to happen on the campus. It can't be top down. However, the system has to look at this from the whole state's perspective, and we have to take a stronger role, although it has to be much more collaborative than it has been. Then it has to be much stronger and less collaborative. And I know that's a top-down perception, but I don't think we're going to get there, given the challenges we face, if there isn't a larger role for the system in this effort. Hopefully, all of that is an engaged process, no question about it. And to John Shelton's point earlier, I think if faculty understand the problem and staff, not just faculty, they are more than willing to try to help. They really are. I really believe that. I'm just not convinced everyone understands the scope of this problem yet. And I don't think we have a lot of time. And I hate to be the Debbie Downer all the time, but this is not a real positive situation. I think Karen, Regent Walsh.
I actually do have my hand up for real this time. So the party not in the room here is a very important thing to keep our eye on, and I'm talking about our legislators. If we don't engage in this process in some way going forward, getting feedback, working together, what I don't want to see is them doing it for us, because as good as they may be about what's going on in their district, we're the ones who understand higher education. You understand your citizens, your students. It's better for us to make these decisions, whatever they are, together, rather than to have a financial emergency occur and have the legislature tell us they're going to do it for us. That's what I would like to avoid.
All right, we have two more folks waiting to speak. First will be Kim Metzger and then Will Sheeter. So first off, Kim, you should be unmuted.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, I'm Kim Metzger. I'm the University Staff Committee Chair at UWGB. And I probably have more of a comment than I do a question. I support both what Sherry Art and John Shelton have put forward. Our campus is concerned about the blueprint only because we're doing really well. Our enrollment is up, and we feel like this is just another really large lift that is going to be tough and maybe not necessary for us. We understand the problem at system and are supportive of it, but we like to look at some other things. The idea of a task force is great. Maybe we need to think about more purchasing across the system versus getting rid of IT. And I know that's one of the things that President Cross had talked about is, buying all the computers at once. I would agree with that. I work in disability services. We buy a lot of really expensive software. It'd be great if we could get a deal across all the campuses on those types of things. Those are the things that we feel would make a difference in the long run. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kim. Always good to talk to you. But I think that's exactly what we're trying to do within shared services, leverage our buying power. And on top of that, being very careful about how we parse out IT. There are certain things that can be done remotely and obviously others that cannot.
All right, next up is our final speaker, and then I will summarize a couple of the points that have come into the Q&A that maybe haven't been addressed in the discussion, just as comments to share. This would be Will Sheeter, and Will, you should be unmuted.
Okay, thank you. I am Will Shader. I'm the UWSP Student Government Speaker of the Senate. And I just wanted to kind of put out there that the comprehensive universities are a huge benefit for rural Wisconsinites, and especially lower income rural students, especially I know at Stevens Point, a large percentage of our student body are lower income, more non-traditional students who the only opportunity they have to go to school is to go to a comprehensive university that's closest to them. So I feel like cutting out the comprehensive universities and making them more pointed and themed would be a huge loss to the state of Wisconsin. And that's where I stand on that issue. But thank you for putting this together today.
Well, I hope that when the dust is all settled, our campuses are stronger and the resources they have available to them actually are improving our ability to provide access to everyone by sharing programs across platforms, across campuses and the like. So access is really, really important, and we've got to find better ways to provide that than simply having a campus every 35 miles. That's an exaggeration, Will.
So before we wrap, I just thought I'd share a couple of common themes that came up from the Q&A, since we didn't get to go to that at all, which is great. Much better dialogue. One point was raised about the Blue Ribbon Commission that was put forth by Representative Shanklin last year, and if the board would maybe endorse that as an approach to looking at the broader higher education challenges facing the state. A number of people raised concerns about taking this on during the challenges faced by COVID and the stress that's put on faculty and staff that are already working to address those issues. And another common theme was the concerns about reducing access to students who live in rural Wisconsin if their nearby campus doesn't have as many programs. That's a reduction in access to those students. Those are some of the concerns. I hope I covered pretty much a generality of what came in from the Q&A. But other than that, I think that is all we have for the day.
Jeff, can I just say thank you to everybody that participated, and also add, I know the board would appreciate hearing from you. So if you have comments that are concerns or frustrations, feel free to send those. Well, you can send them to me, or you can send them to the board office, and they'll make sure the board gets those. I believe the board's email address and their contact information is available on the website, so you can send it directly. But we want to make sure your comments are received by the board. So feel free to share those. Don't hesitate. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Looking forward to working with all of you.
Thanks, Jeff.